Fort Scott, frontier crossroads of conflict and change, where the borderlands boiled, the untold story of Fort Scott. Imagine standing on the edge of a restless frontier, where prairie winds whip across the tall grass and the boundaries between nations, peoples, and ideals are in constant flux. Welcome to Fort Scott, Kansas, a place where the currents of American history collided in dramatic, often violent ways. Here, the ambitions of westward expansion, the heartbreak of Native American displacement, and the fiery battle over slavery all converged, shaping not only the fate of Kansas but the destiny of a nation. Building a western outpost, Fort Scott's early days. Founded in 1842, Fort Scott was one of a string of military posts created to police the ever-shifting border between civilization and the western wilderness. Its original purpose was to maintain peace between Native American tribes removed to the region and the ever-encroaching tide of settlers and traders pushing west. Rows of sturdy limestone buildings and green parade grounds rose on the bluffs above the Marmaton River, signaling the military's intention to bring order to a volatile landscape. Soldiers at Fort Scott enforced treaties, escorted wagon trains, and tried, often unsuccessfully, to keep the peace amid growing tensions. A frontier of broken promises, Native American relations. Fort Scott's story is inextricably tied to the heartbreak of Native American removal. The fort stood at a crossroads for tribes like the Osage, Cherokee, and others forced westward by government policy. Soldiers were charged with keeping peace between tribes and protecting them from white squatters, but more often, they became enforcers of policies that uprooted and marginalized Native peoples. The promise of a permanent Indian frontier quickly unraveled as pressure from American settlers mounted. Fort Scott became both a symbol of federal authority and a witness to the erosion of native lands and autonomy. The uneasy coexistence of tribes, soldiers, and settlers on these prairies foreshadowed the conflicts to come. Bleeding Kansas, the fort at the eye of a storm. By the 1850s, the nation's gaze shifted to Kansas as the question of slavery threatened to tear the United States apart. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 opened the territory to popular sovereignty, allowing settlers to decide for themselves whether Kansas would be free or slave. What followed became known as Bleeding Kansas, a period of violent clashes between pro-slavery and free soil factions. Fort Scott became a flashpoint in this conflict. A divided community, pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers vied for control of the town and the surrounding region. The fort's buildings, no longer an active military post, were sold off to civilians who quickly took sides. Guerrilla warfare, armed bands raided homesteads, burned rival settlements, and fought pitched battles in the countryside. Fort Scott's streets echoed with gunfire and uncertainty. The Underground Railroad. Some residents aided enslaved people fleeing Missouri, turning Fort Scott into a waypoint on the path to freedom, while others worked to capture and return escapees. The fort's parade ground became a stage for the national drama over freedom and bondage, with neighbors pitted against neighbors and the future of Kansas and the nation hanging in the balance. Civil War and beyond, a garrison on the edge. With the outbreak of the Civil War, Fort Scott was reactivated as a Union supply base and hospital. Its strategic location near the Missouri border made it a key target, and the town saw repeated threats from Confederate raiders and bushwhackers. Union stronghold. The fort supplied Union troops fighting in the Trans-Mississippi Theater, protected refugees, and treated wounded soldiers from both sides. End of the frontier. After the war, as the railroad and settlement surged westward, Fort Scott's military significance waned. The fort's buildings found new life as homes, businesses, and schools, but the echoes of conflict lingered. Preserving the past. Fort Scott National Historic Site today. Today, Fort Scott National Historic Site invites visitors to walk in the footsteps of soldiers, settlers, and freedom seekers. Restored barracks, officers' quarters, and parade grounds offer a window into the turbulent decades that shaped Kansas and the American West. Living history. Costumed interpreters bring the past to life, sharing stories of courage, compromise, and confrontation. Exhibits and trails explore museum displays on military life, Native American relations, and the fight over slavery. Outdoor trails lead across the original fort grounds and through the tall grass prairie that once stretched to the horizon. Why Fort Scott matters. Fort Scott is more than a collection of old buildings. It's a living crossroads, where the nation's struggles over land, identity, and justice played out in real time. Its story forces us to confront the promises and perils of westward expansion, the painful legacy of Native American removal, and the bloody birth of freedom in Kansas. Standing on the parade ground, you can almost hear the clash of voices and ideals that once echoed here. In a world still grappling with the meaning of equality and justice, Fort Scott reminds us that history's battles are never as distant as they seem, and that the frontier is as much a place of the spirit as it is a line on a map.